For millennia, Syria was home to a vast array of unique cultures and kingdoms, and though often forgotten between the more well-known Egyptians and Babylonians, the ancient peoples of Syria contributed a vast amount to world culture. This is most evident in the mercantilism of the Phoenicians, the literary productions of the Ugaritic scribes, and the religion of ancient Israel's rivals. But the roots of this arcane cultural complex run deeper than this. Somewhere in the vast deserts, rising mountains, and expansive alluvial plains of this region, a zeitgeist developed that continues to influence the modern world, and perhaps the most important player in this formation was the lost city of Ebla. First investigated in 1964, the prominent walled settlement of Tel Mardich did not present itself to be a paradigm shifter, but many archaeologists had suspicions about its importance. The discovery of several brilliantly carved cultic basins betrayed the secrets of the central Acropolis, and by 1968, inscriptional evidence allowed the site to be identified as the great regional center of Ebla. Current knowledge had shown Ebla to be a fairly significant power in the early 2nd millennium BC, but the true extent of its supremacy was not yet fully realized. 50 years of excavations later, it has earned its place as one of the most significant cities in Syrian history and the larger Near Eastern world. The cultural milieu that emerged during the Biblical and Greco-Roman periods owed a great debt to the people who lived and worked in Ebla hundreds of years before. As with many things, Ebla started small, a simple village on the outskirts of the civilized world. While the powers in Sumer were developing fresh technologies and expanding their influence through trade, Eblaites clung to small-scale subsistence on their squat limestone mound. We know they had early contact with the enterprising traders from Uruk because of the distinctive pottery they left. But how much sway Sumerians had on the locals must be left to speculation. During this period, Ebla was far surpassed by the booming hubs of activity at Nagar and Hamukar, and would largely pass through obscurity until the mid-3rd millennium. Starting from around 2600 BC, Syria experienced what modern scholars have dubbed the Second Urbanization. The small villages and towns that had cropped up in earlier centuries began to consolidate, with cities like Ebla assuming the role of orienting hubs. Walls went up, palaces were built, and administration thickened. Improvements in agricultural and pastoral economies, in addition to increased international trade, encouraged the process of centralization, which Ebla was happy to play a role in. During this time, the first traces of a community of practice appeared as well, which would develop as part of the Amorite identity of biblical fame. Large circular walls known as Kranzhugeln and in antis temple types appear with great frequency across the major centers of Urkesh, Mari, and Tel al-Rada. Such direct access temples as can be seen here were a remarkable architectural and religious innovation. Instead of finding the god through a winding maze of corridors and broad rooms, worshippers would approach fully in the gaze of the dais, as before a king. These temples were usually distributed throughout the city, as opposed to the temple-centered cities of southern Mesopotamia, which may reflect a unique social organization of these northern communities. In Ebla itself, little specific can be discerned from the archaic levels, which are obscured by the large constructions of later periods. At the periphery of the Acropolis, a large building was identified under the palace levels of the next centuries, and its palatial/administrative role is clear. Storage rooms likely belonging to this layer may reflect the increasing agricultural surpluses that arrived at the center during the Second Urbanization. Later tablets preserve the names of several dozen kings who ruled during this time, and who were venerated at special cultic sites after their deaths. Undoubtedly, they were not men of far-reaching significance, but fortunes were on the rise. Known as the Ebla of the Archives, the expansive city that was maintained from 2400 to 2300 BC contains the most expansive representation of architecture, writing, and art. The most important source for the city and Syria as a whole during this period is the palace archive of some 4,000 to 5,000 tablets. It is the only comprehensive collection of written material from Syria during the early Bronze Age. Historians and archaeologists working in this area rely heavily on this documentation for reconstructing the experience of people in all the surrounding areas. And before covering the fascinating history that the archives reveal, I would like to briefly explain the religious and administrative dimensions of Ebla. At the height of Ebla's power, the god Kura, accompanied by his consort Barama, was the uncontested head of the pantheon. He, like so many other Syrian gods, was associated with water and fertility, but unlike the later Baals, he presided over the waters of the deep, making him a chthonic deity. There were two temples for Kura, one near the western city wall and another near the palace at the center. These are known as the Temple of the Rock and the Red Temple, respectively. The outer one was constructed on an unleveled limestone hill with subterranean springs exposed in the inner sanctuary, hence its name. These springs were likely important in connection with the deep waters with which Kura was associated. The inner temple was made of reddish bricks and followed the standard plan of in antis temples discussed above. Both sanctuaries were critical for the annual renewal of the kingship ritual that constituted a major part of the cultic calendar. Other major deities worshipped in the city's environs include Ishkara, a goddess of fertility and love, Ada, a storm god, and Rashap, a chthonic warrior god associated with death. There is a remarkable amount of religious diversity known from this time, which deserves its own video, but now I must turn to the more political aspects of the city. During the 24th century, the physical and institutional dimensions of the state were collectively referred to as Ebla wa Saza, with the king at the head and a close second administrative official leading armies and managing territories. Half of the kingdom in the central and southern portions was controlled by a dozen or so local governors referred to as Lugalu. In their service, they recruited overseers called Ugula, and at the lowest level of management, Mashkim worked on menial jobs. The northern territories were under the entirely different jurisdiction of local client kings, who had much more discretion in the management of their allotted lands. As a whole, the Eblaite state was highly bureaucratized, attendant with nepotism and concentrated power. Records at Ebla are first known from around the time of Igrish-Kalab, who was the first king mentioned in the surviving material. His reign is known to have been at least 5 years, during which a long-standing feud with the city of Mari occupied the energies of much of the state. Among the major centers that had developed during the Second Urban Revolution, Mari, located on the Middle Euphrates, proved to be the greatest rival to Ebla. Its kings had built up a respected political reputation and produced a range of written material. The Sumerians in the south even acknowledged this authority and would later claim the rulers of Mari had taken lands all the way to the Persian Gulf. The most important source for the wars between these two states is the letter of King Ina-Dagan of Mari, sent to an anonymous Eblaite king, likely Igrish-Kalab or his successor Irkab-damu. As a stark reminder of Mari's prowess over the Eblaite king, Ina-Dagan recounts the generations-long history of fighting, which had decisively fallen in favor of the Mariotes. Beginning with Sa'umu, around the year 2400 BC, Mari's armies battered on the towns of the Balik, and eventually the far edge of the Euphrates. The succeeding kings, Ishtupshar, Iblul-il, and Nizi, systematically took Eblaite holdings around the rich plains of the rivers and scattered the forces of the great regional powers. This state of affairs is reflective of a conflict between two already well-established powers. but the archaeological record does not allow us to reconstruct how they came to control such vast territories. During the reign of the above-mentioned Ibla-il, Mari began to extract tribute from the Eblites in several pounds of gold and silver per year. Expansion was seriously threatening the integrity of Ebla's operations, so the officials made a critical decision to establish peace in exchange for a measure of safety. Ibla-il quickly reneged on the agreement by attacking the city of Imar and several towns in Gashur in the following years, but the agreement remarkably held for the following decades. By the time of Dagan, the treaties of generations were growing stale, and thus he wrote to Ebla to remind the people of their stance of submission. Shortly after this letter was sent, the Eblaite king Irkab-damu, successor of Igrish-Kalab, became dissatisfied with the status quo and began to fight back. One of the first indications of the coming tide of Eblaite resistance is a simple economic document from the city, dated to the year when Mari was defeated near Atini. Victory had been long in coming, but the signs were clear. Further records preserved from the palace at Ebla include requests for military supplies from the city of Abzu and a bulking up of administrative oversight at Ebal. The sphere of political and economic influence borne out in the records of the state began to expand as Ebla's armies marched out to recover their lost heritage. Soon enough, equilibrium had been restored by the forces of Irkab-damu, and the so-called 100 Years' War seemingly came to a conclusion. Naturally, however, this was not the end of Ebla's military ventures. The machine that had begun to run could not be shut down so easily. In the waning years of the Eblaite-Mariote War, a powerful man named Ibrium came to occupy the position of second in the kingdom. He will henceforth be referred to as Vizier. And for a span of 18 years from the end of Irkab-damu's reign to the beginning of his son Ishar-damu's reign, Ibrium was likely the most significant military leader in all of Syria. One of his most notable conquests is memorialized in a treaty with the unlocated city of Abarsal. The document begins with a listing of the territorial holdings of Ebla and Abarsal, which proceeded to a lengthy set of injunctions and provisions for the conquered city. Naturally, the treaty ended with a section calling on the gods to punish violators, expecting them to perish in bile. The agreement gave Ebla unrestricted access to the waterways of Abarsal, and demanded that the sons and daughters of the city be slaves to Ebla. This language was likely exaggerated for rhetorical flourish, but one still gets a sense of the dominating character of the control Ibrium so successfully expanded. By the end of his vizierate, Ebla extended some 30,000 square miles from the Middle Euphrates to the Mediterranean. His son, Ibbi-zikir, succeeded him in the office, inheriting the responsibilities of power and prestige for a new generation. Ibbi-zikir's military activities can be broadly divided into campaigns against the north for his first 6 years and campaigns to the south for the subsequent 4. His was a time of consolidation against long-standing enemies and the formation of new alliances with neighboring powerhouses. During these campaigns, King Ishar-damu was surprisingly active on the battlefield, unlike in previous times when the ruler never dared venture so far into danger. Ibbi-zikir's ventures to the north were primarily targeted at the allies of the Kingdom of Armi, which was located in the east. Since the time of Ibrium, Armi had been an object of great desire for the Eblites, and though many military ventures had been successful, the city withstood. Its allies in the north threatened the ambitions of Eblaite commercial and political ventures, and thus it was crucial to make them submit. Similarly, in the south, the kingdom of Ibal impeded growth, so Ibbi-zikir viciously pursued its major centers over the course of several years. Military action was key to building the Eblaite state, but so were alliances. Though Ebla was the principal kingdom of 24th century Syria, the cities of Nagar and Mari reserved a place of great respect among all the kingdoms of Mesopotamia. Ibbi-zikir was sure to capitalize on this, and was able to arrange a marriage between a prince of Ebla and a princess of Nagar in the latter part of Isha-damu's reign. Additionally, deals were made with the North Sumerian city of Kish, which had traditionally been the seat of great kings. The king of Mari likely felt unwelcome in this environment, as it became clear hostilities with its long-standing rival might resume, this time with Ebla on the offensive. Documents preserved in the palace at Ebla record dispatches of troops sent from Nagar and Kish at this time, while the Eblites themselves gathered forces for a large military affront. The Mariotes were stuck in a web of established military power and strong international alliances. Submission seemed inevitable. And so it happened that the combined might of Ebla, Nagar, and Kish met the forces of Mari at the city of Turka, and administered a decisive defeat. Respectful truces were off the agenda as Ebla rode high to victory. In the south, trouble was brewing, however. The Sumerian cities, that had long been a disparate collection of bickering polities, had now consolidated under the hand of Lugal-Zaghazi, a king from the city of Umma. His inscriptions boast of a sweeping kingdom from the rising sun to the setting sun, which may read as an empty boast to us, but surely felt real to the Sumerians who answered to this mighty ruler. However, Lugal-Zaghazi's reign would last no more than 25 years before a mighty man from the city of Agade named Sargon would defeat him and inherit Sumer. A letter from Ebla likely reflects the new political reality by acknowledging that the king of Kish was subservient to a greater man. Sargon's standing army of some 5,600 men soon marched up the Euphrates and took the city of Mari, and in sequence, Ebla fell as well. Ibbi-zikir had helped forge a kingdom of unprecedented might, but for Sargon it was a nuisance that demanded squashing. The city was destroyed and the archives sealed, dooming it to a long obscurity. This is not where the story of Ebla ends. Several hundred years later, there would be a resurgence under Amorite kings, who left a quite remarkable religious and iconographic legacy. But that is better left for another time. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Any ideas for what I should cover next or feedback on what I've made so far are certainly welcome.